Hello, this is assignment number 3 for BFIN 317 Financial Modeling, and today I will be forecasting the sales revenue, income statement, balance sheet, and cash flows for Nvidia. Nvidia was only founded within the last 30 years in 1993. It introduced the first GPU to the market in 1999, which most people now know as a graphics card. In 2012, Nvidia began development on the first AI, which they are still perfecting to this day. In 2018, they introduced the RTX 30 series graphics card, which brought real-time dynamic lighting into animation and video graphics. Nvidia's current large project is the development of what they call the Omniverse, with the purpose of advancing the internet to the next phase, where the metaverse will be built on. Nvidia has proven itself to be a strong competitor in the tech industry, given its relatively short life in comparison to its major competitors. For this reason, I would expect to see this continued growth into the foreseeable future. Nvidia has also conducted a fair number of acquisitions and mergers in the past, at a total of 23 in just 30 years. For this forecast, Nvidia will not be acquiring other companies or incurring any acquisition-related expenses from 2024 to 2026. The latter part of the second assumption will become more apparent when looking at the income statement. Moving to the sales revenue for Nvidia, it is apparent that it has experienced large growth in the last 10 years. With an average growth rate of over 22% for this period, I felt comfortable with a high projection in the coming years. I made the projection more in line with the trend seen in the earlier years simply because COVID may have played a role in some of the exceptionally high growth seen in 2021 and 2022. There seems to also be a trend of 2 to 3 years of high growth, followed by a slowdown. I included this trend in my forecast for the next 3 years as well. As seen in the graphs, there's the period of increased sales revenue for a few years, and then a slowdown which occurs 3 times in the last 10 years. This trend is continued as seen in the sales projection graph. For the projection, I used a polynomial equation because the high growth seen in the past, a simple linear regression was not able to adequately explain the relationship between the revenue and period selected. The historical income statement shows that despite the increase in sales revenue, net income did decrease in 2023. Looking at the individual line items, we see that the main driver of this was that cost outpaced Nvidia's growth, and that there was also a large increase in investment for R&D. All other items increased quite steadily year over year. One important point to look at is the non-recurring item expense from 2023, which also impacted the low net income for that year. This was an acquisition termination expense. Because of the assumption made earlier, this line item will be held constant at 0 for the next 3 years. For the projected income statement, the average percent for the cost of revenue was carried over. This is because it favors the years with higher growth more, which is more likely what will be seen in the future given the past trends. For R&D, the percentage from 2023 was used, as this was the highest percent seen in the last 3 years. I believe that R&D costs will continue to be high due to Nvidia's continued innovation and its current work on AI and the metaverse. The rest of the line items, apart from additional income and expense items, use the average of the earlier 3 years. For additional income and expense items, the percentage from 2022 was used because 2023 saw an abnormal year in interest income. When everything for the income statement is put together, Nvidia is projected to have net income for the next 3 years equal to 8.4 billion, 10.4 billion, and 10.6 billion. The next sheet we will be looking at is the asset side of the historical balance sheet. Initially, what stands out here is that there is a large amount of cash in 2020, followed by 2 years of large increases in marketable securities. This may show that Nvidia is putting a lot of funds into short-term investments. Inventories also increased considerably during this period, indicating that Nvidia is likely planning on expanding or taking on a large project. As for long-term assets, the most notable thing here is the increase in goodwill, which is likely related to an acquisition of 2 companies named ARM and SwiftStack in 2020. Over the past 4 years, overall assets have been increasing quickly as part of total revenue, aside from the slowdown seen in 2023. On the other side of the historical balance sheet, Right away, we can see that accrued and other current liabilities has been increasing. The 10K notes that some of this is part due to the increase in the workforce, again, possibly due to some sort of expansion project. Short-term debt is inconsistent here, and without being able to find any information on this in the 10K, I left this constant as 0 for the forecast. However, it is possible that Nvidia issued a debt like commercial paper to meet some sort of financial need. Long-term debt is also interesting. Nvidia issued 5 billion in debt in both 2020 and 2021. This is another item that is difficult to find why, but because my assumption is that there will be no acquisition or mergers, I decided to not increase long-term debt in the forecasted years. All other liability items have been steadily increasing without much standing out. The shareholders' equity section is interesting for a few reasons. Nvidia has been repurchasing and retiring shares in the last several years, and there has been a reduction in retained earnings. It's difficult to determine what the company is doing with this, but it does not seem out of the realm of possibility that they are in the process of reorganizing their capital structure. However, for the purpose of this forecast, I'm going to be holding equity constant and adding the net income seen on the income statement to the previous year's retained earnings. So here are the projections for Nvidia's assets in the next 3 years. Cash, marketable securities, inventories, and prepaid expenses are going to be calculated off the percentage of revenue from 2023. This is to follow the trend from the following years, as it looks like Nvidia is going to be ramping up production. As seen in the 10K, they have been using proceeds from sales and marketable securities to increase inventory and PP&E. For that reason, this trend is carried over in the forecast. This in turn has resulted in a slower increase in marketable securities in the future. Operating lease, deferred taxes, and other assets continue to slowly increase, while goodwill is held constant. This brings assets totaling to 50 billion, 62 billion, and 73 billion for 2024 to 2026. Under current liabilities, accounts payable is increasing in relation to Nvidia's increased production, as well as its accrued liabilities. For long-term debt, I took the approach of decreasing it in the next 3 years. Because of the uncertainty around Nvidia's likely plans with its capital structure, I maintain the trend seen in the previous year. It looks like they may start paying off some of their long-term debt, and this is seen in 2024 to 2026. The final two line items also continue the previous trend and therefore will continue increasing into the future. The final section on the balance sheet is equity. Here all equity is held constant and retained earnings are calculated by adding the net income to the previous year's retained earnings. With this, the assets equal liabilities and shareholders' equity, completing the balance sheet. Finally are the cash flows. The cash flows are simply the change in line items seen on the balance sheet year over year, and they are classified into three categories, being operating, financing, and investing activities. The cash flows are designated as either being inflows, which are positive, or outflows, which are negative. Looking at the historical operating cash flows, we see that accounts receivable, except for 2023, inventories, and other activities have been negative and gradually trending in an increasing fashion. The same goes for liabilities, with a steady increase, but increasing positively, minus the slowdown seen in 2023. For investing, there's a similar trend seen in capital expenditures, which is things like PP&E, which was discussed on the balance sheet. Likewise, investing is showing an inflow, reflecting the sales in marketable securities. Other investing activities were shown in relation to acquisitions, and because of my prior assumptions, this will be held at 0 for the projection. Last is financing, which consists of Nvidia's debts and equities. There's a large outflow in 2023 due to a purchase of stocks and nothing from borrowing, given they did not issue any new debts. Because it is difficult to predict the plans that Nvidia has for financing, the forecast will simply use the trend seen in the last 3 years on its cash flows. Nvidia has been experiencing an increase in end cash year over year. Moving to the projections, the assumptions made on the balance sheet carry over to the cash flows by taking the difference between the previous years for each line item. Operating activities is likely to continue increasing in the normal growth years of 24 and 25 before slowing down again in 26. Investing activities are also going to move similarly, with an increase in the next 2 years followed by a slight reduction. For financing, Nvidia will be repurchasing stocks, converting them to treasury stocks. This has been quite common in the previous years and will continue. It will also begin paying off some of its debt, as seen on the balance sheet, representing more cash outflows between 2024 to 2026. After adding together the totals from operating, investing, and financing cash flows, Nvidia will see their end cash to be 4.5 billion, 5.5 billion, and 5.7 billion in the next 3 years. And here are the references that I used.